Have you ever experienced a moment so unreal, so unexpected, that it made you question everything you thought you knew about life? Moments like that don't usually come with warning signs. They creep up silently, hidden beneath ordinary days, waiting for the exact second to shake you awake. Imagine this. You're out on a boat, the kind of quiet afternoon where nothing seems to happen. The sun is high, the ocean looks like glass, and you're surrounded by miles and miles of nothing but endless blue. Then from the corner of your eye, something shifts. A ripple where there shouldn't be, a movement that doesn't match the rhythm of the waves. You squint, you lean over the edge, and that's when your stomach drops. It's not driftwood, it's not a buoy, it's alive, and it's drowning. What would you do? Before we dive into this unbelievable story, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Every view, every voice, it matters. Because this story isn't just about a dog. It's about choice, about instinct, about what we do when the world turns silent and someone needs saving. And it all began on a sea that was just a little too calm. The ocean has a strange way of whispering things to you. Sometimes it's with the crash of waves. Sometimes with the stillness that makes your heart race even more than the storm itself. And on that morning, just off the coast of Florida, 17-year-old Thomas Grady felt that stillness, the kind of eerie quiet that makes the hairs on your arms stand up, not from cold, but from knowing something's coming. Thomas had been out since just before sunrise, his father's old fishing boat patched up over the years with duct tape and stubborn hope bobbed gently with the rhythm of the sea. He wasn't a professional fisherman, not even close, but he loved the solitude, the escape, just him, the boat, and the ocean's breath. 6 hours had passed. The only thing biting was the sun, and even that was beginning to feel less like warmth and more like punishment. His skin was turning pink, his cooler was still empty, and the silence was starting to wear on him. He stood at the bow, squinting at the horizon when he saw it, a small shape, out there, far out. At first he told himself it was nothing, driftwood maybe, a floating bag, some random debris pulled by the current. But it didn't drift. It moved, and not with the ocean, but against it. There was resistance, desperation. Thomas narrowed his eyes, leaned over the side, and felt something shift deep in his gut. The water might have been calm, but inside him, something had already started to churn. He grabbed the binoculars from the console, pressed them to his face, and focused in. That's when he saw it. Soaking wet, barely above the surface, struggling. It was a dog, and it was drowning. Thomas's heart skipped a beat. There, in the endless blue, was the unmistakable outline of a German shepherd, soaked to the bone, its fur slicked against its body, ears pinned back by the weight of water and exhaustion. It was barely keeping its snout above the waves. Every few seconds, its head dipped under, then jolted back up gasping. No one, no life jacket, no boat, no land in sight. Just a dog alone, fighting the ocean. Thomas dropped the binoculars and shouted out instinctively, "Hey, hey, buddy!" His voice cracked in the open air, swallowed by distance and waves. The dog didn't react. It couldn't. Its movements were slowing. Its paws paddled with no rhythm, no strength. There was no more strategy, just survival. And even that was slipping. Thomas knew he had no time. He slammed the throttle forward, his old boat roaring to life, slicing through the water as he aimed directly for the struggling animal. He didn't have a plan. He didn't need one. When you see something like that, something so utterly wrong, so vulnerable, you just move. As he closed the distance, the reality hit even harder. The dog's eyes were glazed, sunken with fatigue and fear. Foam clung to the corners of its mouth. Its body bobbed like driftwood, barely responding to the water around it. Thomas's chest tightened. Not today, he thought. Not on my watch. He cut the engine as close as he dared without creating waves, ripped off his shirt, grabbed the emergency rope ladder, and tossed it overboard. Then he dove. The water was colder than expected. Sharp, alive, but he powered through, muscles burning, heart pounding. The dog began to sink. Thomas reached out, one hand grasping soaked fur, and pulled. He wasn't going to let him go. Not now, not ever. The dog didn't resist. That's what shook Thomas the most. There was no panic, no flailing, just a sudden surrender, as if the shepherd's body had been waiting to give up the moment it felt the touch of another living soul. He was heavy, not because of his size, but because his strength was gone. Dead weight, lifeless in Thomas's arms, but not gone, not yet. With one arm wrapped around the dog's torso, Thomas kicked furiously with the other, dragging both of them back through the water toward the boat. Every stroke felt like a mile. His lungs burned. Salt stung his eyes. His grip was slipping, but he didn't loosen it, not even once. "Come on, come on," he muttered under his breath, fighting the pull of the sea and the voice in his head telling him he wouldn't make it. The rope ladder scraped against his side as he reached it. He shoved the dog upward, struggling to get the shepherd's paws onto the bottom rung. The dog didn't move until instinct took over. Somehow, he found the will to climb. His front legs pulled, then again, and again. Thomas was right behind him, pushing, guiding, whispering, "You're okay. I got you, I got you." Finally, the dog collapsed onto the deck, trembling violently, water pooling around his soaking frame. His sides rose and fell in shallow, ragged gasps. Thomas hauled himself aboard and dropped to his knees beside him. Hey, stay with me." He gently wiped the water from the dog's eyes. One of them blinked just once. Thomas exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. "You're alive," he whispered, and somewhere beneath that soaked, beaten body, the tiniest flicker of something glowed. Not just survival, something deeper. A bond was forming, one that neither of them had seen coming. The deck of the boat creaked beneath them as it rocked gently on the water. But for Thomas, the world had gone still. He knelt beside the German shepherd, both of them soaked to the bone, salt burning their skin, hearts pounding in separate but strangely synchronized rhythms. The dog didn't lift his head. His body shook uncontrollably. Every breath he took seemed to come with effort, like his lungs had forgotten how to trust the air. Thomas gently ran a towel across the shepherd's face, trying to wipe away the seawater. His hand trembled, whether from exhaustion or emotion, he wasn't sure. He didn't even know this dog, but something in him already cared, deeply. "You shouldn't be out here," he whispered, more to himself than to the animal. "This far out? What happened to you?" The shepherd's eyes, barely open, found his, and that's when Thomas saw it. Not just fear or fatigue, but something harder to define. Awareness. Will. He wasn't just surviving by accident. He'd fought for hours, maybe longer, because he wanted to live. Thomas pulled a dry tarp from the storage bench and carefully wrapped it around the dog. Then he opened a bottle of fresh water and slowly poured some into a bowl. The dog didn't move at first, but when Thomas slid the bowl close, the shepherd sniffed, then licked, then drank. Not fast, not desperate, just steady, quiet, as if even drinking was a risk that had to be taken slowly. Thomas sat back against the side of the boat, staring out into the horizon. Nothing but sea in every direction. "You've seen something, haven't you?" he said, glancing at the shepherd. "Something no one was supposed to survive." The dog didn't answer, but he didn't have to. He was still breathing, and that said everything. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of gold and pale pink. Thomas stared at the dog curled in the tarp, finally still, finally warm, but far from okay. His breathing had evened out, but his body told another story. The pads on his paws were raw, red and bleeding, evidence of endless swimming, scraping against nothing but salt and time. No collar, no tags, no signs of anyone looking for him. But as Thomas gently examined the shepherd's thick, matted fur, something cold and rigid scratched his finger. Wedged near the base of the neck, tangled tight against the skin, was a small piece of metal. He carefully pried it free. It was a jagged sliver, corroded from the salt water. Maybe it had once been a full tag, maybe part of something larger. Military, security. Hard to tell. But there, etched faintly into the metal, one character remained visible, the letter R. Thomas turned it over in his palm. No number, no name, just that one letter. "Is that you?" he asked aloud. "R?" The dog didn't react, but for some reason the name stuck in Thomas's mind. R. It didn't feel like a nickname. It felt like a code, a fragment of something forgotten or buried. He leaned back, still holding the shard between his fingers, feeling the weight of unanswered questions pressing in like the darkness around them. Who leaves a dog 135 miles offshore? Why is he trained, calm, silent, yet scarred like he's been through war? And why does this broken little piece of metal feel more like a warning than an ID? Thomas didn't know yet, but as the first stars appeared above, he looked at the shepherd again, wrapped in tarp and silence. He was no ordinary dog, and R was no ordinary name. Thomas stood at the edge of the boat, the broken metal tag still in his hand, the night air brushing against his wet clothes. He glanced back at the dog, no, at R, still wrapped in the tarp, still trembling lightly but alive, breathing, watching. Every instinct told Thomas he should call someone. Animal control, the Coast Guard, a rescue center. That's what you're supposed to do when you find a stray in trouble. But this didn't feel like a stray. This felt like a secret, and secrets like this, you don't hand over to strangers. He thought about it all during the slow trip back to shore. The boat's motor hummed, barely loud enough to drown out his own questions. What if R had been abandoned on purpose? What if he belonged to someone dangerous? Or worse, what if no one even knew he was gone? By the time he reached the marina, it was past midnight. Everything was closed. The lights on the docks flickered. A stray cat darted between crates. The world had gone quiet. Thomas lifted R in his arms, still heavy, still limp, and carried him up the dock to his old pickup. He didn't drive to a shelter. He drove home. His cabin was simple, one room, faded blue walls, a creaky porch with a swing that hadn't moved in years. It wasn't much, but it was warm, safe, private. He laid R on a folded blanket near the fireplace and set down a bowl of water. The dog didn't move at first, but then his eyes opened just enough to track Thomas as he stepped away. There was no bark, no wag, just a long, slow blink. And Thomas knew, without a doubt, he'd made the right decision. R would stay, for now. The fire crackled gently in the hearth, casting warm shadows that danced along the cabin walls. The storm that had hovered on the edge of the horizon never came, but inside Thomas's chest, something still churned, quiet, unspoken, like a tide waiting to turn. R didn't move much that first night. He didn't sleep deeply either. His body remained curled tightly on the blanket, as if still bracing for something. His eyes fluttered open every so often, scanning the room before falling shut again, always alert, always calculating. Thomas sat across from him, legs stretched out on the worn floorboards, an untouched cup of coffee cooling in his hands. He didn't try to pet R, didn't talk much either. Sometimes the best way to earn trust is to give space. So he sat, and he waited. In the early morning light, something changed. Thomas opened his eyes to the sound of faint movement, claws tapping softly across the wooden floor. R was standing, wobbly, stiff, favoring one paw, but standing. He didn't come close. Instead, he walked to the corner of the room, turned around, and laid down again, facing Thomas this time. That was the first real sign. Later, Thomas boiled some plain chicken and left a small portion in a bowl beside the water. R approached it slowly, head low, sniffing. Then bite by careful bite he began to eat, not greedily, not like a starving stray, with precision, control. Thomas watched him closely. "You've had training," he said quietly. "You weren't just someone's pet." R didn't flinch, didn't deny it. He just kept chewing, slow, focused, silent. Whatever his past had been, it hadn't broken him. It had forged something inside him, something strong, something waiting for the right moment to come back to life. The following day, the rain came. soft and steady, like the sky had been holding its breath all night and finally let go. Thomas stood at the window, mug in hand, watching droplets race down the glass. Behind him, Ranger lay near the door, paws stretched out, eyes half closed but always listening. He'd started calling him that, Ranger, because the letter R felt too cold, too clinical. And there was something about the dog's silent strength, the way he moved with intention, that deserved a name with meaning. But Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that there was more behind those eyes than he could begin to understand. And so, he made a call. Mike Cooper wasn't just an old friend. He was a former K9 handler, someone who had worked with military dogs during classified operations overseas. If anyone could see through the silence, it was him. When Mike stepped into the cabin that afternoon, Ranger didn't bark, he didn't growl, he didn't run. He simply watched. Mike crouched down slowly, careful not to approach too directly. "Mind if I try something?" he asked. Thomas nodded. Mike extended 2 fingers, palm down, then curved them gently. Ranger's reaction was instant. He dropped to the floor, spine straight, tail low but not tucked, eyes locked on Mike. Thomas froze. "What was that?" "Silent command," Mike said, his voice suddenly heavy. "Used in tactical teams. That's not just a rescue dog, Thomas. He's trained." The room fell quiet, save for the patter of rain on the roof. Mike stood slowly, eyes never leaving Ranger. Whatever he came from, it wasn't a backyard. Someone trained him for something serious. And now, he's here. Thomas looked down at Ranger, who lay perfectly still, breathing slow. Whatever his story was, it was bigger than either of them realized. That night after Mike left, the cabin felt heavier. Thomas sat alone in the flickering light of the fire, the rusty tag with the faint letter R still in his palm. His mind was spinning, trained, tactical, silent commands, and dropped in the middle of the ocean like debris. He looked over at Ranger, curled near the fire. The dog's breathing was steady, but every so often he twitched in his sleep, small spasms in his paws, a shiver in his shoulders, like he was reliving something in his dreams. Thomas couldn't sleep. Instead, he climbed the creaky stairs to the loft and pulled out an old metal case from beneath a stack of forgotten fishing gear. Inside was a dusty laptop, one he hadn't touched since leaving the Navy dive program. He powered it up. The screen blinked slowly to life, humming like an old engine waking from hibernation. After a few minutes of tapping through encrypted folders and security protocols he barely remembered, Thomas found a backdoor access to an old restricted military database. He shouldn't have still had access, but apparently the system hadn't caught up with reality. He typed in keywords: German Shepherd, no chip, tactical response, missing, only one match. Project, Nightmark asset code, R7 breed, German Shepherd status, presumed lost at sea mission. Type, open water reconnaissance handler, classified deactivation. Date, 3 days ago. Thomas stared at the screen. They knew he was out there. They didn't look for him. They marked him as lost, not retrievable. He closed the lid slowly, the glow from the screen still burning in his eyes. Behind him, Ranger stirred. Whatever this dog had been a part of, it wasn't just dangerous. It had been erased, and someone hadn't wanted him to survive, but he did. And now Thomas had a choice to make. Thomas barely heard the sound at first, just the crunch of tires on gravel outside. It was nearly 2 a.m. The cabin sat at the end of a forgotten road, surrounded by pine trees and stillness. No one just showed up out here. He moved to the window, careful not to make a sound, and pulled back the curtain an inch. A black SUV, no license plates, parked just beyond the gate. 2 men stepped out. Plain clothes, neutral expressions. One of them held a small metallic device in his hand, something that glowed faintly blue with blinking lights. The other wore gloves, thick and dark, like they weren't here to knock. They were here to take. Behind Thomas, Ranger lifted his head. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He growled, a deep, low vibration from somewhere ancient in his chest. Thomas turned to him. "They're not lost," he whispered. "They're looking for you." He shut the laptop and slipped it into an old duffel bag, grabbing his truck keys from the hook by the door. "We're leaving, but not through the front." They moved quickly, slipping out the back door, down a dirt path Thomas hadn't used in years. It led into dense woods, barely lit by moonlight. Ranger stayed close, his body low, ears twitching with every rustle. By the time they reached the old pickup Thomas had parked off trail, his heart was racing, but not from fear, from clarity. Whoever those men were, they weren't rescuers, and this wasn't about a dog anymore. It was about what Ranger knew, what he had seen, what someone didn't want uncovered. Thomas fired up the engine and drove, every bump in the road rattling his bones. In the passenger seat, Ranger didn't flinch. He just watched the road ahead, calm, alert, like a soldier, like someone who'd been here before. The road beneath the tires turned from cracked pavement to loose gravel, then to hardened earth as Thomas veered off the main route, following a forgotten trail that snaked through the woods like a memory. He hadn't been this way in years. It led to a small, abandoned marina tucked against a forgotten bay, once used for covert diving ops, now left to time and rust. No cameras, no neighbors, no cell service, and hopefully no eyes. Ranger sat quietly in the passenger seat, gaze steady, breath slow. Every time Thomas glanced over, the dog seemed to be calculating, analyzing, not panicked, prepared. The truck's headlights barely pierced the fog beginning to roll in. Behind them, the road remained empty astray, but Thomas knew better. No lights didn't mean no tail. These people didn't need sirens or spotlights. They operated in the shadows, like Ranger had once done. They reached the marina just before dawn. The sky was still dark, but the edges were softening into blue. Thomas killed the engine and let the silence wrap around them. They didn't speak. Ranger didn't bark. Both of them simply moved. Inside the old boathouse, Thomas pulled back a tarp to reveal his secret. A narrow, military-style inflatable boat, fast and nearly invisible on open water. He hadn't used it in a decade, but instinct told him it was time again. As he loaded supplies and uncoiled rope, Ranger stood at the edge of the dock, staring into the water. The wind moved through his fur. Something in his posture changed. He was no longer just a rescued animal. He was watching the shore, ears angled toward a presence that hadn't revealed itself yet, because they were being hunted. And this time, Thomas wasn't just running, he was protecting. The boat cut through the water like a whisper, leaving barely a ripple behind. Thomas kept the motor low and the lights off. Every instinct told him to stay quiet, stay low. The bay around them was still asleep, mist rising from the surface like breath from the earth itself. Ranger stood at the bow, eyes locked on the dark shoreline behind them. Every now and then, he'd glance back at Thomas, not out of fear, but to check in like a partner would, like a teammate. Thomas felt it then. That strange sense that they weren't just escaping something. They were heading toward something too. He'd spent his whole life relying on logic, training, plans. But none of that explained why he'd risked everything for a dog he didn't know. None of that explained why his heart beat differently now when he looked at Ranger, not like a pet, not even like a soldier, like family. They reached a hidden cove, one Thomas had used long ago when the world felt simpler and danger wore a different face. He anchored the boat in silence and led Ranger up a narrow, rocky path through the trees. At the top was a small lookout, high above the coastline. From there, they could see everything, the road behind, the bay below, the horizon ahead. As they sat, breathing in the salt air, Thomas pulled the rusted tag from his pocket. R7, he said softly, turning it over in his fingers. You were a number to them. He looked at the shepherd sitting beside him, chest rising and falling with quiet control. But to me, you're Ranger. No rank, no mission, just you. Ranger leaned gently against his leg, a silent answer. Not obedience, acceptance. Whatever lay ahead, they'd face it together. Morning arrived slowly. A golden glow spilled over the treetops, soft and gentle, as if the world itself was hesitant to wake. On that secluded bluff above the ocean, surrounded by wind and silence, Thomas sat beside Ranger. No longer fugitives, no longer strangers. The sun touched Ranger's fur, now cleaner, beginning to fluff back to life. His eyes were calm, not sharp like the soldier he once was, but present, awake, alive. For the first time, Thomas saw no pain in them, only peace. They had come so far, from a dying animal alone in the sea, to this moment. But deep down, Thomas knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. Someone would come again, sooner or later. The people who had trained Ranger wouldn't give up easily, but something had shifted. The mission, whatever it was, had failed. Ranger had made it out alive, and now a quiet, almost sacred responsibility hung between them. Thomas took the tag from his pocket one last time. That bent piece of metal with a single letter, R, wasn't just an identifier. It was the last link to a life built on orders and silence. He stood, walked to the edge of the bluff, and with a single breath, let it go. The tag sailed into the air, caught the light for one final moment, and vanished into the water far below. When he turned around, Ranger was watching him, not with confusion, but with understanding. It was over. They hiked down together, the trail narrow but familiar. When they reached the boat, Thomas paused. "You can run, you know," he said softly, placing a hand on Ranger's back. "If you ever want to disappear into the forest, I wouldn't blame you." But Ranger didn't move. He stepped into the boat, turned once, and sat. Not a sound, just presence. Thomas smiled faintly. "I figured." Later that evening, they returned to the cabin. The porch light flickered on. The old wood creaked under their steps. Thomas cooked dinner. Ranger curled by the fire, tail slowly tapping the floor in quiet rhythm. The past hadn't vanished, but it no longer owned them. In the end, the greatest mission wasn't survival. It was choosing to live together. If you made it this far, take a breath, because what you just witnessed wasn't just the story of a lost dog. It was the story of resilience, of trust rebuilt from silence, of how sometimes even the most broken among us find their way home. Ranger wasn't just a military asset dumped in the ocean. He was a soul, trained, used, discarded. And yet, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by waves and sky, he fought to live, not because someone told him to, but because something deep inside him still wanted to. And Thomas, he could have walked away, could have made one call and been done. But something about that dog reached past the logic, past the fear, and into the part of all of us that still believes in second chances. Their bond wasn't built overnight. It was forged in cold water, sleepless nights, and moments where nothing needed to be said, but everything was felt. And maybe that's why you're still here, because you believe in that kind of bond too. So let me ask you something. Where are you watching from? What part of the world did this story reach today? More importantly, what's your greatest dream? Seriously, comment below. Don't hold back. Whether it's starting over, finding someone who sees you, or simply believing again in something lost, this space, this channel, is about stories that touch something real. We don't just tell tales. We invite you to feel them. So here's what you can do to help us keep sharing moments like this. Subscribe to the channel, Tales with Paws. Every week we bring you powerful, true inspired stories that show what love, loyalty, and courage really look like. Like this video if Ranger's story moved you, even just a little. Comment and tell us not only where you're from, but what part of the story stayed with you the most. What moment made your chest tighten, or maybe gave you hope? And yes, this video took hours to write, narrate, edit, and craft with care. So if you believe in what we're building here, help us grow. Because somewhere out there, there's another story like Ranger's waiting to be told, and together, we'll find it. See you in the next one.